This is what happens when you take a black veteran's silence as his weakness. The streets of Manhattan buzzed with their usual chaotic symphony, honking cabs, distant sirens, and the occasional shout from a street vendor hawking hot pretzels. It was late afternoon, the golden light of autumn spilling over cracked sidewalks and casting long shadows across Times Square. Among the throng of hurried pedestrians stood Benjamin Hale, a wiry man in his late 60s, leaning against a graffiti-covered wall near the subway entrance. His weathered face bore the marks of years spent under both sun and sorrow, his faded army jacket hanging loosely on his frame. A cardboard sign rested beside him, Vietnam Vet. Anything helps. Across the street, Evan Cartwright, a sharp-featured white news reporter known for his fiery rhetoric and unapologetic opinions, adjusted his tie as he stepped out of a sleek black car. Camera crew in tow, Evan scanned the crowd with predatory precision, searching for his next viral moment. He smirked when his gaze landed on Benjamin. To Evan, this was perfect, a homeless black man in a city full of stories waiting to be twisted into headlines. "Let's see what we can stir up today," Evan muttered to himself, his polished leather shoes clicking against the pavement as he approached Benjamin. The air crackled faintly with tension, unnoticed by most, but palpable enough to make a nearby barista glance up from her phone. Something about this encounter felt off. Little did anyone know, the quiet man sitting there held more strength than they could imagine. And Evan was about to learn that respect isn't given, it's earned. Evan stopped a few feet away from Benjamin, his camera crew fanning out behind him. With a smug grin, he leaned in slightly, microphone already in hand. "Hey there, buddy," Evan began, his tone dripping with feigned friendliness. "Mind if we ask you a few questions? Maybe share your story with our viewers." Benjamin didn't look up immediately. His dark eyes remained fixed on the cracked sidewalk, as though weighing whether to engage or ignore. When he finally raised his head, his expression was unreadable, calm but guarded. "What kind of story are you looking for?" he asked, his voice low and steady, carrying the weight of someone who'd seen too much. "Oh, just the usual," Evan replied, his smirk widening. "Homelessness, struggle, all that jazz. You know, something real, relatable." He emphasized the last word with a patronizing chuckle, glancing back at his crew for approval. A small crowd began to gather, drawn by the commotion. Some watched curiously, others scrolled on their phones, only half paying attention. One woman clutched her coffee cup tighter, sensing the edge in Evan's tone. Benjamin tilted his head slightly, studying Evan like an old general sizing up an inexperienced soldier. "You sure about that?" he said softly, almost to himself. But Evan missed the warning beneath the calm exterior. He was too busy framing his next jab. Evan's grin faltered for a split second, but he quickly recovered, leaning closer with exaggerated interest. "Oh, I'm sure," he said, his voice laced with mockery. "But let's get real here. What's your story? Did you just give up? Or is this some kind of performance art?" The crowd shifted uneasily. A man in a business suit glanced at his watch, then back at the scene, while a young woman with headphones paused mid-step, her brow furrowing. Benjamin didn't flinch. Instead, he reached into the pocket of his jacket and pulled out an old photograph, worn soft at the edges. He held it up briefly before tucking it away again. "Careful now," Benjamin said, his tone still calm but firmer this time. "You don't know what battles people carry." Evan laughed dismissively, waving a hand as if swatting away the comment. "Battles? Come on, pal. We're not talking war stories here. We're talking about you. Sitting on the sidewalk, begging for change. What's heroic about that?" A murmur rippled through the growing crowd. The barista who'd noticed earlier crossed her arms, her lips pressed into a thin line. Even Evan's cameraman hesitated, lowering the camera slightly. But Evan pressed on, emboldened by his own bravado. "So, tell me, Mr. Veteran," he sneered the title sarcastically, "how does it feel to live off others' hard-earned cash?" Benjamin's jaw tightened ever so slightly, the only sign that Evan's words had landed. The air grew heavier, charged with unspoken tension. The crowd grew denser, forming a loose semicircle around Evan and Benjamin. Some whispered to each other, their expressions uneasy, while others filmed the exchange on their phones, adding to the pressure. Evan, sensing the audience's attention, turned slightly toward them, raising his voice for dramatic effect. "Come on, folks," he said, gesturing theatrically at Benjamin. "Is this what we're supposed to respect? A man who won't even stand up for himself." He leaned in closer to Benjamin, his smirk sharpening. "Or maybe you're just lazy. Is that it? Too tired to work, too proud to admit it." Benjamin remained still, his hands resting lightly on his knees. His silence was unnerving, almost magnetic, drawing more eyes to him. The young woman with headphones stepped forward hesitantly, as if wanting to intervene, but unsure how. "You think you know me," Benjamin finally spoke, his voice cutting through the tension like a blade. "But you don't know the first thing about struggle or sacrifice." Evan scoffed, clearly unimpressed. "Oh, please, spare me the lecture, old man. If you've got wisdom to share, why are you sitting here instead of doing something with it?" The barista let out an audible sigh, shaking her head. Even Evan's cameraman shifted uncomfortably, glancing at the growing disapproval among the onlookers. But Evan seemed oblivious, feeding off his own arrogance. Benjamin's gaze hardened, though his posture stayed relaxed. For the first time, there was a flicker of something in his eyes, steel beneath the calm. Evan leaned back, crossing his arms with a self-satisfied smirk. "Well," he challenged, his voice dripping with condescension. "What's your big comeback, huh? Or are you just going to sit there like—" Benjamin interrupted him, his voice calm, but commanding, cutting through Evan's words like a knife. "Like what?" he asked, his eyes locking onto Evan's for the first time. "Like someone who's already fought battles you couldn't even imagine?" The crowd fell silent. Even the distant hum of traffic seemed to fade into the background. Benjamin slowly rose to his feet, standing tall despite his slight frame. He reached into his jacket again, this time pulling out a folded American flag patch, its edges frayed but still vibrant. "I carried men like you off battlefields," Benjamin said, his tone measured but laced with quiet authority. "Men who thought they were invincible until they weren't. So forgive me if I don't take life advice from someone who's never had to fight for anything real." Evan blinked, caught off guard for the first time. His smirk faltered, and he took a small step back, glancing at the crowd as if seeking reassurance. But the onlookers were no longer on his side. Their faces reflected curiosity, respect, and growing unease toward him. The power dynamic had shifted. Evan's face flushed, his confidence wavering under Benjamin's steady gaze. "What are you even talking about?" he stammered, trying to regain control of the situation. "You think a patch and some vague war story make you special? Everyone loves playing the hero card." Benjamin didn't rise to the bait. Instead, he stepped closer, his presence commanding despite his unassuming appearance. "Special? No," he said, his voice low but resonant, carrying the weight of years spent in silence. "But I earned this." He held up the flag patch, his fingers brushing over its worn fabric. "In Vietnam. In places where men like you wouldn't last 5 minutes." The crowd murmured, their curiosity piqued. Someone whispered, "He's a vet." Another nodded solemnly. Evan shifted uncomfortably, his bravado crumbling as Benjamin continued. "I came home to a country that didn't want me," Benjamin said, his tone neither bitter nor angry, just matter of fact. A black man, a soldier, spat on by the same people waving flags at parades. "But I survived. I rebuilt. And now I sit here. Not because I'm broken, but because I choose peace over bitterness." Evan opened his mouth to retort, but no words came out. For the first time, doubt flickered in his eyes. The barista stepped forward, her voice cutting through the tension. "Leave him alone," she said firmly. "Can't you see he's got more honor in one finger than you'll ever have?" The crowd erupted in murmurs of agreement. Even Evan's cameraman lowered the camera entirely, unwilling to document what had become an embarrassing spectacle for his boss. Benjamin turned back to Evan, his expression softening slightly. "Respect isn't given freely," he said. "It's earned. And you, son, haven't earned mine yet." Evan's face turned a deeper shade of red, his usual slick composure unraveling. He glanced around at the crowd, searching for support, but found only disapproving stares. The young woman with headphones crossed her arms, glaring at him. Even the man in the business suit shook his head subtly, as if silently urging Evan to back down. Benjamin, now fully upright, stood like a statue, calm, unshakable, and radiating quiet authority. "You came here looking for a story," he said, his voice steady but carrying an edge that silenced the murmurs around them. "But you didn't stop to think about whose story you were stepping on." Evan tried to laugh it off, though the sound was hollow. Okay, so you served? Big deal. Everyone's got a sob story." "This isn't a sob story," Benjamin interrupted, his tone sharp enough to cut steel. "This is my life. And if you'd spent even a minute listening instead of judging, maybe you'd understand what respect really means." The barista chimed in again, her voice firm. "He's right. You're out here making a fool of yourself, while he's teaching us something real." Evan's eyes darted between Benjamin and the growing chorus of dissent from the crowd. His hands twitched nervously at his sides, and for the first time, uncertainty crept into his expression. "Look, I didn't mean—" "You meant every word," Benjamin countered, cutting him off once more. "And that's why you need to hear this. Not everyone owes you their pain or their past. Some lessons are earned through humility, not headlines." The weight of Benjamin's words hung heavy in the air. Evan took another step back, his earlier bravado replaced by visible unease. The cameraman muttered something under his breath and began packing up the equipment, signaling the end of the spectacle. The crowd, once tense and divided, began to loosen as Benjamin's words settled over them like a balm. Evan stood frozen, his usual sharp tongue silenced by the gravity of the moment. For the first time, he seemed small, out of place in his polished suit and expensive shoes, surrounded by people who now saw him for what he was, a man more interested in spectacle than substance. Benjamin turned to address the onlookers, his voice softening but no less powerful. "Respect isn't just a word," he said, his gaze sweeping across the faces before him. "It's a choice to see someone not for what they lack, but for what they've endured. To listen instead of assuming." The young woman with headphones nodded, her earlier frustration melting into admiration. "Thank you," she murmured, loud enough for others to hear. The ripple effect was immediate. Nods and murmurs of agreement spread through the crowd like wildfire. Evan, still reeling, opened his mouth as if to speak, then closed it again. His shoulders slumped slightly, the fight draining out of him. Without another word, he gestured for his crew to leave, retreating toward the black car that had brought him here. As the crowd dispersed, some lingered to offer Benjamin a kind word or spare change. One man even shook his hand, saying, "You handled that better than anyone could have." Benjamin simply smiled faintly, tucking the flag patch back into his jacket. The atmosphere had shifted from hostility to reflection, from judgment to understanding. Evan climbed into the back seat of his car, avoiding eye contact with his cameraman as the engine roared to life. His hands trembled slightly as he loosened his tie, the weight of what had just happened pressing down on him. For the first time in years, he felt truly exposed, stripped of his armor of arrogance, and forced to confront the emptiness beneath. The drive back to the studio was silent, save for the faint hum of traffic outside. Evan stared out the window, replaying Benjamin's words in his mind. Respect isn't given freely. It's earned. He clenched his jaw, shame burning in his chest. The faces of the crowd haunted him. Their disapproval, their pity, their quiet respect for a man he dismissed so carelessly. For all his talk about strength and self-reliance, Evan realized he'd never truly understood either. His bravado had been a mask, hiding insecurities he wasn't ready to face. And now, that mask lay shattered at his feet. By the time the car pulled up to the studio, Evan's usual swagger was gone. He stepped out slowly, his head bowed, his thoughts swirling with questions he didn't yet have answers to. But one thing was clear. Something inside him had shifted, a crack in the wall he'd built around himself, letting in a sliver of light. Back on the street, Benjamin returned to his spot near the subway entrance, reclaiming his quiet corner as if nothing had happened. The crowd that had gathered began to disperse, some casting lingering glances of admiration in his direction. A few people dropped extra bills into his hat, their gestures now infused with respect rather than pity. The barista approached him, holding out a cup of coffee. "This one's on me," she said with a warm smile. Benjamin accepted it graciously, nodding his thanks. "You didn't have to do that," he replied softly, but she shook her head. "Yes, I did." As the commotion faded and the rhythm of the city resumed, Benjamin leaned back against the wall, sipping the hot coffee. To the casual observer, he appeared unchanged, still unassuming, still calm. But those who had witnessed the confrontation saw him differently now. They saw not just a homeless man, but a teacher, a survivor, a man of quiet strength. The air felt lighter, the tension replaced by a shared sense of reflection among those who remained. As the afternoon sun dipped lower, the bystanders who had witnessed the exchange carried the moment with them. The young woman with headphones replayed Benjamin's words in her mind. Some lessons are earned through humility. She resolved to be more mindful, to listen before judging. The man in the business suit paused at a crosswalk, glancing back toward Benjamin. "We don't know what people carry," he muttered to himself, adjusting his briefcase. Even Evan's cameraman, packing up equipment back at the studio, found himself questioning whether chasing sensationalism was worth the cost to others or to his own conscience. For Benjamin, life returned to its quiet rhythm, but the ripple effects of his actions spread outward. Those who had stood there would remember, not just his story, but the lesson it embodied. Respect, dignity, compassion, they weren't abstract ideals. They were choices, ones that began with seeing each other as human. And though Benjamin remained seated on the sidewalk, his presence lingered like an echo, reminding everyone who passed by the unseen battles we all fight. As the city lights flickered to life, Benjamin gazed at the bustling streets, his expression serene. Respect, he knew, wasn't about grand gestures. It was found in the quiet moments of understanding between strangers. For Evan, the lesson burned like an ember, sparking a slow but steady change. And for the crowd, it was a reminder. Every person carries unseen scars, stories that deserve acknowledgement. In a world quick to judge, Benjamin had shown them another way, to see beyond appearances, to honor the battles others bear. And so, the city moved on, carrying with it a little more light than before. The next morning, the confrontation between Benjamin and Evan had gone viral. Footage of the exchange, captured by onlookers, spread across social media like wildfire. Headlines praised Benjamin's quiet dignity and condemned Evan's arrogance. Comment sections overflowed with admiration for the veteran, and soon, a grassroots movement began to take shape. It started with the barista who had stood up for Benjamin. She posted a heartfelt plea on a local community forum. "This man is a hero who deserves better than what life has handed him. Let's get him off the streets." Within hours, donations poured in. Small contributions from strangers, larger sums from veterans organizations, and even a GoFundMe page that skyrocketed past its initial goal. By midday, volunteers were out searching for Benjamin. When they found him still sitting near the subway entrance, he looked up in surprise as a group of people approached, led by the young woman with headphones. "Mr. Hale," she said gently, kneeling beside him. "We've been looking for you." Benjamin frowned, his weathered face etched with confusion. "What's this about?" She smiled warmly, holding up her phone to show him the fundraising page. "This is about giving you a second chance. People want to help. You've inspired so many of us." Benjamin stared at the screen, his eyes widening as he scrolled through messages of support and saw the total amount raised. Over $50,000. His throat tightened, and for a moment, he couldn't speak. Finally, he whispered, "Why would anyone do this for me?" "Because you reminded us what it means to be human," the barista interjected, tears glistening in her eyes. Over the following weeks, Benjamin's life transformed. The funds allowed him to secure a modest apartment in Brooklyn, furnished with donations from grateful supporters. Local veterans groups connected him with counseling services and job placement programs tailored for former service members. He even reconnected with an old comrade for Vietnam, reigniting a friendship thought lost to time. But Benjamin didn't stop there. Determined to pay forward the kindness he'd received, he began volunteering at a shelter for homeless veterans, sharing his story and offering guidance to those struggling to rebuild their lives. His calm demeanor and wisdom became a beacon of hope for others walking the same difficult path. Evan, watching these developments from afar, felt a pang of guilt, but also inspiration. In a surprising turn, he used his platform to highlight Benjamin's journey, dedicating a segment to the importance of supporting veterans and marginalized communities. It wasn't redemption, but it was a start. As Benjamin stood on the balcony of his new home one evening, watching the city lights shimmer in the distance, he allowed himself a rare smile. Life hadn't been fair, but it had given him something unexpected, a family forged not by blood, but by compassion. And in that moment, Benjamin knew he wasn't just surviving anymore. He was living. Have you ever been in a situation where someone tried to mistreat you or take advantage of you? Let's talk about it. Share your experiences and how you dealt with the situation in the comments. If you enjoyed this and want more content on Inspiring Black Stories channel like this, please like, subscribe, and hit the notification bell. Thanks for watching, and remember, your strength is greater than you think.